Good evening,
Good
all.
evening, all.
I've got
I've got
Susan Lee with
Susan
me
Lee with
tonight,
me tonight,
and
and
we're going to
we're
talk
going to talk
about
about
children, really.
children,
What
really. What
happens when
happens
we
when
they have a
they have a
divorce, when the
divorce, when
family
the
have a
family have a
divorce?
divorce?
Susan,
Yeah,
it
I
can
mean,
it can
It
it.
can be.
go on.
Go on.
No, I was thinking. I wasn't sure if you. Yeah, I think it can be a tough time, can't it, when a ch- a child or more than one children, particularly young children, are involved in a situation where what they regard as normal, their family life, their parents are looking to separate, and how that is handled can be very important, can be crucial for their happiness, for their sense of security, for how settled they feel within themselves. So it's kind of like how we handle that situation that is increasingly common. But what we tell them, what's age appropriate, that kind of thing, really.
So when is
So
the
when
best
is the
time to
best
tell
time to
them?
tell them?
Well, I think first of all we have to accept that children are not stupid. So whatever age they are, they will know that the atmosphere is difficult at home. They may have got used to it, but they're going to have perhaps other friends, and they will see what life is like in their homes, perhaps, if their homes are good and happy and secure, and then they'll be aware of what's happening in their own home, particularly if there's a lot of arguing or tensions. But even if there aren't, children are incredibly good at sensing atmosphere. So if there's arguing going on behind closed doors, or they hear crying behind closed doors, or they hear shouting, and then somebody's going, shh, keep it quiet, they still know that there is a tension perhaps between, if it's mum and dad, a tension between their actual parents, and there's an awareness of that. So I think at some point, if ideally you sit both the children down together, and age appropriate, child appropriate, sort of say, well, mummy and daddy, if it is indeed mummy and daddy, your mum and dad don't care for each other, don't love each other the way that they used to do, but we still both love you, and you can talk to either of us, whatever happens, you can talk to either of us, and we're going to keep everything as settled, as normal as we possibly can. And I think you have to be age appropriate, but not get too invested in digs or slights or trying to undermine each other, perhaps when you're on your own with the children. It's trying to keep that sense of, I'm divorcing the other parent, but I'm not divorcing the children, and it's a very different relationship, the one that parents have with each other as they have with individual children.
Great. We've got to avoid the blame game,
haven't we?
I think that's important, and I think the thing with that is that you often find the dynamics of home life can change, because it may be that there's a requirement to move. It may be there is one parent who has significantly more income than the other. It may be that the parent that the children are living with now has to find a job. It may be that they're camping out for a time, with other friends or family members, or having to rent. So it can be quite a situational shift in some families. And as a consequence of that, it can be that there is a lot of hurt or resentment or annoyance about being in that situation. And so for a time, it can be that one parent is perhaps taking quite a lot of the burden, and the other may appear to be getting off scot-free, possibly. So obviously that's not always the case, and I'm speaking in generalities, but that can be a situation which can cause a certain amount of tension. And again, the children are not stupid. They're aware of the disparity. They're aware of what's going on there. And I think this is where we have to park our own, if we're the sort of custodial parent, we have to kind of park our own feelings to a certain extent as far as the children are concerned. And it's often easier said than done. But it is about then saying, okay, what can I do to support myself whilst I'm going through this situation, this transition from being in a relationship, no matter how difficult it was, being in a relationship with certain lifestyle and standing and things. How can I accommodate myself and support the children till I get to my new normal? And there's ways that we can do that where we perhaps don't rush into making decisions. We maybe for a time will rent or go and live with family or go and share with friends or do a house share or something, so that there is support around us and that we're not on our own, and that there are people in our company who we can perhaps turn to for a little bit of help or advice or support, or just have people around that just help ease the load a bit.
But the very important is to be honest.
I agree. Yes, I think that is very important, that whilst you don't tell the children too much, they don't need to know all the details, particularly if they're young children. They don't need to form a view of the other parent based on the custodial parent and what they feel, but absolutely not lying, absolutely being honest, but appropriately honest, and depending on the capability of the child, not just age, but how emotionally stable is that kid? Can it cope with the aftermath of anything you're going to tell them? And this can be sometimes where grandparents are often a very untapped resource, and grandparents can be really useful in providing a sense of security for children, because they're often older, obviously, and they may well be in a situation where they are able to offer support, perhaps financial support. Maybe they may have a lot more time, free time, so they can spend time with the children, helping out, taking them perhaps to school or picking them up or giving them a bath or giving them the tea at night or whatever it might be. And they're often also a very solid link for children to somebody who is hopefully a little bit neutral, or certainly not invested in the drama, who can be a comforting link with the past, the present and the future. And so for children, they have somebody they can turn to and share how they're feeling, and share their fears and concerns, and get some support. But obviously you have to hope that they're the grandparents who are balanced enough to be able to do that and not be divisive, not be siding particularly with one parent over the other.
Yeah, and also don't share any negative feelings.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't want either the parent or the grandparents to be... They have their own views, and they can talk about those things when they're together in adult company or with friends or whatever. But telling children, your dad or your mum went off and had an affair, or did this wrong, or did that wrong, or lied, or whatever, isn't necessary. And as they will get older, those children will form their own views, but they will also have their own very distinct relationship with their parent. And so it's about keeping some sense of being fair about it, really, and also telling the children they can see or speak to the other parent, the absent parent, whenever they want. And if the absent parent decides they don't want to do that, well, that's a different matter. But giving children the opportunity to say, there's a phone number, or there's a Zoom link, or you can go around and see them, or whatever, depending on what's happening, how close are they, what the situation is. But in the main, it's often good if children can keep some sense of connection with both parents and the lifestyle they knew and the relationships they had to as much as possible.
There's certainly a lot of decisions to be made.
Yeah, and I think the thing with decisions is about taking your time. So if you're the parent who's mostly impacted, perhaps you've ended up with custody for the children in the main. You may be having to work, you may be having to change home, you may be having to consider schooling options for children. There can be a lot of decisions, and at a time when somebody is feeling incredibly vulnerable. And they may, you may be feeling unlovable or unloved or rejected, or inadequate in some way as a consequence of going through that mill of the breakup of the relationship. And that's why, if at all possible, it can be a good idea to take time, if you can. Take time to say, okay, what needs dealing with immediately? Well, that might well be living arrangements, or it might be income. And there can be all sorts of things that are important to take on board. But again, if you can possibly bide your time and say, okay, right, I'm not being rushed into something. And also listening to people's advice, but not necessarily doing everything other people suggest, because other people may well have good motives, but they're not necessarily going to follow the advice they're giving you if they were in exactly the same situation. So it is about, if possible, taking a chance to take a little bit of a step back and say something like, I hear you, thank you so much for caring, I'll think about what you've said. But often, you know, if we're following other people's you should, you must, you ought to do this or that or the other, that's not necessarily the best way forward for us. And so it's giving ourselves a chance to just think, okay, I'm not rushing into any hasty decisions immediately. Going to take my time, see how I feel, you know, and any long-term big commitments I'll review over the next few weeks or even longer, even a few months, you know.
Yeah. What happens if if the grandparents come in and take over?
Well, yeah, it's that can be a difficult one, can't it? So I suppose there's that thing about having a conversation. I mean, I always say start as you mean to go on in any situation, depending on what the relationship was like before with the grandparents, and depending on whose relative they are. Again, that can influence the kind of conversation you have. So if they're your own parents, or if they're your ex's parents, it might well be a very different decision on how to approach them. But I suppose to some extent it can be a difficult one, because on the one hand you may well need their time, their attention, their hopping in to pick them up and take them to school, being there in the evenings and babysitting for an extra couple of hours. You know, I was talking with somebody today who said it was having grandparents around the corner was fantastic for her, because she had to go back to work and sometimes she had to work away overnight. And so for her, those grandparents were crucial in helping her get back on her feet again and establish a new post-divorce life. But it depends if they think that their intervention is buying them sort of almost parental rights, then there may be a need to have some sort of conversation. But you have to kind of be careful, because if you're needing them to be there, then it's a difficult one, and you maybe have to start agreeing if you're spotting, I don't know, a different way of disciplining the kids, or they're allowing the children to stay up later than you want, or eat more sugar than you want them to have, or have more treats than you want them to have, or play out, you know, spend more time watching TV or on the games. Then you have to sort of think about, how am I going to have this conversation? And being polite about it, and realising that they are helping, they're doing the best they can, and that they are doing you a favour at the end of the day. So it's about being tactful. And one of the things I will often say is, don't just, you know, be sure that you include the grandparents in the good times too. So it's not just about using them as unpaid, you know, babysitters or caretakers or meal providers or whatever, or taxi drivers. It is also about saying, let's include them in Sunday lunch, let's include them in park time when we all go together, or Christmases and birthdays and things. So include them in the fun times too, so they feel part of the family, and they maybe get a sense of the kind of person that you are. And then realise, actually, we're in this together, let's work as a team, rather than just take over and be authoritative and say this is what's happening. So it is about starting as you mean to go on, but being clear about the various things that really matter to you, the various values, but don't necessarily get too uptight over perhaps smaller things. You know, if they do things a certain way and you do them a different way, does it matter? Is it important? Or are you just feeling a bit miffed because you're not the person who's there doing it. You know, they are almost taking over, but that you need them to do that. So it's kind of like biting your tongue a little bit and reflecting on how much of an issue their way of doing things perhaps is for you. And is it just ego? Is it just that your nose is a bit out of joint because you're seeing them do things that you wish you were doing, but you can't at the minute? You know, so it's kind of like owning your own reactions too, I think.
Yeah, we need to allow our kids to express what they want.
Yeah, if we're disappointed with things, we can react in certain ways, can't we? And it's about reining that in a little bit and thinking, actually, hang on a minute, these grandparents are doing a fantastic job. You know, or it might be, instead of a grandparent, it might be an aunt or an uncle, but whoever they are, they're doing a really great job. They are related to the children. They care about the children, so let me not get too angry, upset, irritated at them doing a good job, doing the best they can. You know, are the children being negatively impacted in this way? Is it a bother for them? If it's not, then maybe just chill it out a little bit and just appreciate you're going through a tough time yourself, and so some of your reactions and responses may be due to that rather than the grandparents.
Um, trouble is, it's hard sometimes when parents do fall out, you know, fighting for custody, access, but we shouldn't fight in front of our children, should we?
No, and a lot of those discussions, if there is a custody battle, maybe try mediation. Mediation can be a very effective way of both parents and perhaps with their lawyers as well discussing together individually what they want and coming to some sort of compromise, and doing that away from home, doing it away from an inflammatory situation where the children are involved, or even necessarily asking the children what they want. If they're young, they might not want to upset a parent. They might not want to cause them any further harm. They may feel guilty, or they may feel sad for one parent who they know is perhaps on their own or is struggling a bit. So having some of those conversations away from home and in a, you know, if you don't want to use a mediator, maybe find somebody who can act as a mediator, like a therapist or a family friend or a religious figure that you trust and respect, but somebody who you can actually sit down with and say, okay, this is, you know, we've got a couple of hours to spare, we're both in a calm place, here are my questions, this is what I want to know. And then you kind of talk about it, maybe thrash it out, decide what you can compromise on and what the other person feels is important for them, and try and find ways to reasonably manage the child situation as best you can. Now, some people won't do that, but for a lot of people, if they can step back a little bit from their own hurt and anger and perhaps desire for revenge or whatever it might be, if they can step back a little bit from that, they maybe see that the best outcome is that, okay, we don't, as parents, we don't love each other anymore, but we certainly love our children. We used to love each other, so let's try and navigate our way through this, because we're going to be connected in some way through the children for the next 10, 20, 30 odd years, particularly if they partner up and have children of their own. You're going to be involved to a greater or lesser extent in each other's lives for potentially for quite a long time, maybe for even forever. So it's about finding ways through that suit everybody, you and the children as well.
Brilliant. Susan, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
In life, we all have our problems in relationship. We must not fight in front of our children. They know, and they can see what's going on. It will affect them. Probably when they get older. Let's stop being adults. Let's move on. If it's not for us, do it for our children. Bye for now. Thank